Hello, YouTube theologians. Pastor Wolfmueller here with Pastor Matt Richard, who has just finished or about to publish a new book, Matt's famous old book, which a lot of you recognize, Will the Real Jesus Please Stand Up? Now, this is a really cool kind of follow on to that. Will the Real Church Please Stand Up? Matt, how are you?
Doing well, my friend. It's good to see you. It's been a
Um,
while.
I know it. I'm proud of you. Another book. This is like it's like giving, well, you can't say it's like giving birth.
Right.
It's like
Back
giving
that up.
birth. Don't tell Carrie I said that. Will the real Jesus stand up is 12 false Christs as opposed to the true Christ. The thing that really impressed me, I don't know if I ever told you this, man. The thing that really impressed me about that, we're going to talk about in this new book, but the thing that impressed me was that it kept digging down. So you would present a false Christ, and then but then there was another layer and another layer. In other words, it kind of surprising profundity. I don't know if that you're like, hey, why did it surprise you, Brian? You should know that. But it seems like there's a similar, you do a similar thing in this book. I've kind of skimmed through it and read the first couple of chapters, and I'm looking at your really handy chart that's at the end of the book for the different types of church that you have, the framework that you have, and it's peeling back the layers on how do we recognize um, the true church in the midst of so many of these false churches that are presenting themselves to us, and you dig into that with the story of this family that's moved to a new town and they're going church shopping. So give us maybe the narrative overview, and then I want to dig into each of these churches that they visit, and the framework that you use to distinguish them.
Yeah, yeah. So the Campbells, now I wanted to kind of like the other book, wanted to actually have a journey that the reader is basically like a fly on the wall, right? And so they're kind of peering into these events. And so a couple things here. Number one, we wanted to make sure we weren't creating straw men. When I say we, when I was visiting with my editors at Concordia Publishing House, I want to make sure we weren't creating a straw man, like create a straw man and then you beat up on something that's not real. So trying to base it off of real churches that I've encountered, the real kind of flavor of the church architecture and all that. So that was very important to do that. The second thing was each of the churches that the Campbells visit, we wanted to make sure to frame them in a very positive light. So focus on what they're doing well, and to frame it with basically an eighth commandment kind of perspective where we're highlighting these churches are doing these great things. And so the Campbells walk away from each church saying, man, that was a really good experience. Great church. They're doing great things. Then third, with the Campbells, we wanted to now like why the Campbells? I actually went to Chat GTP and I asked for for the most common names of men in their 40s, and that's where I got Ben Campbell and then his wife and then his children. So I just went on there try to get the most generic names possible. And then I went to Chat GTP and I said, what's the most common town in America? And they said Midway. There's tons of Midways. And so trying to make that kind of a generic story of the Campbells, so that anybody can relate to the Campbells. And so, the Campbells then are going to go, like you said, church shopping to each of the churches. And then as we come to each church, we start from the perspective of the architecture, what they're seeing, what they're smelling, what they're experiencing. And all that really communicates, as you mentioned, too, kind of a sense of layers. It communicates a unity at the very foundation of the church, a unity and a purpose. And so as they come from the outside in, we want the reader to hear about, like, again, the architecture, the smells of the coffee, the how the people are interacting with them. As they come into the church, what they notice, how big the structures are, what's being focused, even down to the detail of noticing that, hey, in one of the churches, the sanctuary was okay, but it wasn't really well kept as much as the gym. So the gymnasium and the fellowship hall, they were meticulous and new and clean, whereas the sanctuary was not nearly as clean. So all those little details are pointing, funneling the reader to the unity of the church, and the unity is going to express what really is important in the church, what they're focusing on, and the purpose. So again, it's kind of coming from that outside. So an average reader is going to read this and say, "Oh, that's kind of neat, the architecture, things they're experiencing." But all of those little tiny details are pointing to that unity embedded in each church and the purpose.
That's really nice. So that's the framework that you use to discuss both churches, or discuss all the churches, all seven. Oh, eight, eight. So seven
Seven
false,
false
one
ones,
true.
and then one
So,
and one true.
so you're asking the question: what's the unity of the church, and what's the purpose of the church? And that
Yeah.
all the things that are so the unity should be understood as what is the unifying what goal of the church, or what is the everything is kind of centered around one particular. How would you describe that unity if I was trying to track that down?
Well, a lot of this kind of, as I was kind of thinking about this here, I actually went back to an old sermon I preached here at St. Paul's, and it was the sermon on the Tower of Babel. And so the people are gathering around their own name to make their name great. And then they have these towers that they're building. Some theologians believe that the towers were actually made to escape another potential flood that was coming along. So, I kind of was pondering this idea as far as, what towers do we gather around in the American church, in the present day. And so unity is going to be the fancy Greek word is going to be koinonia, and it's going to be the hub at the center, what we actually gather around, the thing that we are drawn to. And so, if you use this example, like let's just say with a sports, or let's do this like with a hospital. So what does a hospital gather around? What unifies the hospital? A good hospital is going to be unified around the patient. Now, unfortunately, over the years, I've come into contact with hospitals where I encounter doctors and nurses where they think that the whole hospital should hover around them, the doctor. And if hospitals do that, if they hover around the physicians, then it's a misplaced unity. The unity of a hospital should be unified around the patient. And now, then the question is, then okay, for what purpose? Now, here's what's tricky. If you get the purpose, or what we would say that telos is the Greek word telos, the end goal, right? If the end goal of a hospital is to give those patients a cozy stay and a good breakfast, then we would say, okay, that hospital has their unity correct, right? The patient, but then their telos, their purpose, is going to be misplaced, going to be functioning like a hotel. They're functioning like a hotel, and that's completely wrong. And so they function to bring healthcare, and we see this in other things, like such as like we're in football season right now. My son plays football. What is the unity of that football game? It's a little brown ball. That's what they're unified. That's where everyone, if the ball goes this way, everybody runs this way. The ball goes this way, everybody runs this way. And then the goal is to take that little ball, the telos, and get it into that end. And the other time, I mean, it's really, really simple. But let's just say they go out and they gather around the referees, then it makes no sense, right? If the goal is to take that ball and run it into the concession stand, it's the wrong telos, it's the wrong purpose. And so this sounds very elementary, but if we go to that basis and that really, really, simple basis of what is the unity and what is the purpose of a church, we can really find out quickly that, man, there's so many churches in America that have that unity misplaced without even thinking about it. And then their purpose, their telos, that purpose, that end goal is misplaced. And so there are two very, very fundamental and simple questions that we need to ask of all of the churches. And even, I've asked it here of St. Paul's. What is it that we're unified around? I mean, so if people come in, where do all the budget of the church, where do the people's focus, where does all that go? Where are people looking here at St. Paul's? And then if you ask the person in the church here of St. Paul's, why do you exist? What's your purpose? Where are you going? Those should be able to be answered. And unfortunately, many times we can't answer that. And when we do, we're afraid of the answers.
Mm. That's fantastic. So it's not just for people looking for churches, but it's also, I mean, we are in the church and we can ask this diagnostic of ourselves. It's just so helpful, Matt. So if it's okay, let's walk through your seven archetypes and see how that goes. The first one is the quest. I love it. The quest. It's not even a
Yeah,
church name. This is the big box church. So I'll be able to describe the first two because that's how
yeah,
far I go.
yeah,
So then you'll have to. So you go in. It smells like coffee. The guy's got his skinny jeans on. The rock band is playing. Everything is. Hey, welcome to the quest. And you're on the announcements are so you're at step one, but now it's step two, step three. The kids are off in their own thing, getting their swag. Um, tell us about the unity of this church and the purpose.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we know this church. I mean, we've experienced it, and in developing the quest, I wanted to make sure to get a title. And you see these churches where they have their title, even their title, right? Their title communicates something about them. So the quest, they're on a journey, right? There's here in Minot, there's churches like this too. There's a church called the Journey Church, and I'm gonna take a little dig at them. I had a funeral here at St. Paul's, and I was talking to these ladies, and I said, "Well, what church do you attend?" They said, "Oh, we attend the Journey Church." And Brian, I couldn't help myself. I said, "Oh, that's amazing." I said, "Where are you guys going?" And they said, what? I said, well, you're the Journey Church. I said, where are you going? And she kind of looked at me. I said, well, my other question too is, I said, if you're on a journey, what happens when you get there, when you
Hmm.
arrive? Is the game over? I'm obviously I'm poking him a little bit, but I'm also joshing with him. And she said to me, I kid you not, she goes, I don't know, Pastor Richard. She goes, our pastor just said it would help attract young people.
That's right.
So
The
anyway,
journeyed,
yeah. So
the
anyway,
the wandering church. This is that, the 40 years in the wilderness. You'd have to
right.
try to figure out how to get the extra, British U or an extra E somehow in it,
Yeah.
So, no.
So anyway, the quest is all about their unity is going to be a good customer experience. And so okay, so when we look at the quest, we want to say, they do it well. And so their bulletins are great. And their PowerPoints are excellent. Their music is professional. They have great coffee. I mean, wonderful coffee. Everything in that church is done well. And so we want to, eighth commandment wise, say, hey, they're doing it great, even down to the padded seats in the sanctuary that the Campbells experience, to the app and to the customer experience. It is absolutely phenomenal. Okay. So we want to actually commend them on that. But then the purpose, here's the problem. The purpose is they're on a journey, but it's undefined. And it's an undefined journey. And so people that are coming in are entering the journey. The people that are there are on the process of the journey, and those in leadership are helping other people get on a journey. But that whole point of where they're going, it's undefined. Even the music, everything in there, the music, this happening. Now, here's the problem with this kind of mentality, is it has kind of a sexy appeal to it, right? We're going somewhere, right? We're on an adventure. But then what happens when you actually arrive at the end of the venture? Then the adventure's over. I mean, that's kind of the pursuit. It's like a young teenage girl. She's excited about the chase, right? Of getting the boy. And then once she gets the boy, then she gets bored with that, and then she wants another chase. And so unfortunately, and again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to these churches with this respect, but this is actually what many of them do. They're on a journey, they're on a mission, and it's undefined, and it's centered around a good customer experience. So we get people to come in to the good customer experience, and then we move them along on their steps.
Then we go to Parkside Community Church, which is where the gym is brand new. They're putting a bowling alley in the youth room. The church sanctuary is neglected. The pastor gives them a tour of the facility, starts late. The kids want to go to they want to go swimming with the other kids during the week. That's all about what? What's the unity there? Friendship. It's the church that's built around the community experience. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, at the very center of this one, the unity is going to be friendship. Now, that's where the problem we have the word fellowship, which we use so oftentimes. We can use the word fellowship and we can equate fellowship with friendship. But biblically speaking, true fellowship is going to be that koinonia. It's going to be connected in Christ. And so you and I, for example, like, we're friendly to each other, but I would say that that is not the strength of our unity, but our unity is that we're what? Baptized into Christ. And so I'm connected at a much deeper level with you, Brian, through the blood of Christ and through our baptisms. And that's with this church. They look at the strength of the church through their friendships, and then in order to have those friendships, they have all these different events that are happening in friendship aspects, and so they don't see their friendship through the gospel and through the word and through baptism and so forth, which is the reason why they neglect their sanctuary. But it's a friendship directly between each other. Now, their purpose and goal, though, is to be what we call sectarian, to be what we call a modern day monastery. There's a sense where they are trying to pull away from the world. And so the people find a great deal of comfort by coming to this church because they have friendships with one another. And then they are what? Secluded from the rest of the world. And their social life is going to be lived out in the midst of the church, apart from, let's say it this way, the big bad world that's out there.
This is I love that I mean you have so much content in the little kind of pull-out sections of the book too, where you're talking about that dangers of modern day monasticism, because we think, oh, that's a medieval ancient sort of thing. But this idea, how would you that that there is holy stuff is church stuff. And if it's happening outside of the church at home, then or at work or just in the world, it's not holy. So you want to have a holy swim party, it's got to be a church swim party, and a neighborhood swim party, that's a secular swim party. So you're building that secular sacred divide. You're defining it as the church, and that's the only place where things are holy. This is a big problem with evangelicalism.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can recall in previous churches many, many years ago, and this had numerous examples of this, where individuals would come to the church and they wouldn't miss any events at the church. And yet, you look in their vocations, and I'm be a little critical on this. You look in their vocations as a grandpa or grandma, or a neighbor, and they have a neighbor that's in need, or they have a grandchild that needs to be looked after, and that was somehow perceived as being less godly, and that you would have to serve in the church for that to actually count. And that's what I'm pushing back on in this chapter with this church here. We need to remember the doctrine of vocation, obviously, that we have good works to do, not only in the estate of the church, as we're participating in the church, but also in our families and in the civil realm of the state. And so there's been many times where I've had people in St. Paul's where they'll say, "Hey, Pastor, I couldn't make the meeting the other day. I had a family obligation. I'm really sorry." And I'm like, "I'm not going to forgive you." I'll just say, "I'm not going to forgive you." And they look at me. I'm like, "Well, you don't, because you don't need to apologize. You don't need to apologize for missing a meeting because you're dealing with something that is what just as godly, and if not more important, dealing with a family member that is in need. Absolutely. So you're not going to apologize. We have our meetings, we have many people on our boards for a reason. And so again, it's this idea of that if it's inside the church, it counts, and if it's outside the church, it doesn't count. And that's, man, that's very dangerous, very dangerous. And you see that displayed in the architecture of Parkside. You see it in their bulletin, right? If you look at their bulletin announcements, it's just every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, there's events all week long, and then Sunday's just kind of a little footnote. The church services are just a little bit of afterthought.
Mm. This is it's an amazing thing too, because and that's it, I appreciate the subtlety because it's a matter of emphasis. So a lot of times it's like we're looking at something like, well, that's right and that's wrong. Like if they're talking about the doctrine of baptism or election or something, well, that's right doctrine, that's wrong doctrine. But we can also be wrong by emphasizing the wrong thing. So it's not bad. I mean, I talk about this all the time, how you have to have friends at church, and it's harder to miss church if you have friends there, and it's harder to go to church if you don't. It's we should cultivate our Christian friendships, but that can't be the main thing. That can't be the it has to be a fruit. It can't be the tree.
Yeah, yeah, and again, as we mentioned before, the Campbells come away from each of these churches, and they come away from Parkside, and they're just amazed at how friendly everyone is and how connected as a family that they are. And so again, each of these chapters trying to be very, very careful that we don't throw the whole church under the bus. And so there's an aspect where we want to commend that friendship is good. I sure hope people at St. Paul's, and I sure hope people at your church, that they're friendly to each other and they enjoy each other. But, the fact of the matter is, if you don't, really enjoy another person in the church, that's okay if you don't have the same interest, because guess what? You are what? At that rail with them, receiving from Christ, baptized into the one true faith together with them. And that unity is much deeper. It's much deeper than just a mere friendship. And so, again, all of these churches, they are false, not necessarily because they're spewing forth, demonic doctrines, or, they're going around with a pitchfork and Tabasco sauce, right? And just ha 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 ha, right? No, they're doing great things, but these great things are distracting from the main unity of the church, the main telos, the main purpose of the church, which then drifts them away from ultimately, as we see in the last chapter, Christ and his gifts.
What about Mercy Hill Church? Here's where you have to take me on the visit with the Campbells. What's that like?
Yeah, Mercy Hill Church. They come there. It's a beautiful church downtown Midway. Beautiful church. Now, where the church is located downtown, there's a lot of federal housing, and so it's a church that's kind of positioned itself to take care of the community downtown, and so a lot of people in need. Now, very briefly, we understand the three estates of church, government, and family. And so the basis of this church is that there are people around this church, in the vicinity of the church, who have broken families. So the estate of the family is broken down. When the family breaks down, then these individuals don't have mercy care. So this mercy church, then seeing that need, jumps into that sphere of soup kitchens and backpacks for those who are in need, and then starts to fill the void of the family. And so we want to commend them. They're doing a great job of stepping in to try to help compensate for the failure of the estate of the family. However, then again, like all these other churches, they fail to neglect their main calling, of the church, of proclaiming the gospel, administering the sacraments, delivering Christ and his forgiveness of sins. And so again, I heard a pastor once say this is what we call mission drift. So it's a fancy term that I've heard. And basically it's you can see this in the workforce as well, where a business then kind of loses its main mission and focus. So there's a drift, you would say, an emphasis on the wrong syllable, as Rod Roosevelt used to say. So they're again, so we commend them. They're doing a great job of helping out these families, filling the void of broken families, providing mercy care. But then again, they're forgetting their main calling as a church.
Then, and I don't know if it's week after week. Again, this is where I dropped the narrative. So they must go to a few weeks later, the First Church of Midway.
Yeah. This one, I had fun writing this. This is the church where they came, and it's located down by across from the mayor's mansion of Midway, down by the courthouse. They come in. It's a very, very, very ritzy church. The pillars on the outside, and there's definitely some bling. And they come in and they notice all these nameplates everywhere, and there's a giving wall. And then they notice one of the fellowship halls named after a name of a parishioner of the church. They open up the hymnals and there's names printed in there. They come and they encounter people, and it's a bunch of name dropping. And I've been a part, I visited churches like this, and you just feel so incredibly insecure and small. And they come to find out that this is the who's who church of the community. And every community has this. I've been in a lot of communities over the last 25 years, and there's always that church where all the people go, and that is this church. And so the people are going to this church for social validation. And then the reason that they're a part of this is that they do these good religious works in this church to be noticed and to add to their social notoriety in the community. And so the church is just an accessory to them in adding to their prestige in the community. And so the Campbells interact with a bunch of who's who people of the community. Again, uh, nothing wrong with being quote unquote a mayor, and nothing wrong with being a top attorney, nothing wrong with being involved with a great business in the community. But the people that the Campbells interact with, they are up on that hierarchy of social standing, economic standing in the city of Midway, and they're using that church as another tool to help validate them on that ascent to notoriety in Midway there. And so they leave. Actually, this is the first church where they leave actually feeling a little bit disgusted, a little bit dirty, and they just really can't put the finger on it. And they kind of realize, we're not important enough to attend that church.
Wow.
And so this church is kind of the first one where they leave with a little bit of a knot in their stomach, and they don't really talk about it, just kind of drop it, and they're like, let's move on.
What's the preaching like there, First Church of Midway?
You
Did
know,
they?
the preaching there, I didn't really focus a ton on the preaching, and so again, that was as far as an emphasis. The preaching was probably, if and again, I didn't write about this, but if I were to depict this preaching, it would have just been very bland kind of preaching. Again, the focus was on their standing and being noticed, and the giving, and then the way is the social connections that were made, and being there in the church to be noticed that I'm a churchgoer in the community. That business owner, he's a godly man. He goes to that church, and again, it aids to their prestige and social standing. And so the church again is not really a huge focus for the main individuals of this church. It's an accessory to help them in their social validation of the community.
Then, so okay, so out of that church into the Cornerstone Community Church. This one looks like fun. The unity there is moralistic intra-group competition, and the purpose is arriving at self-improved utopic bliss.
That sounds really smart, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So
Man,
it's
I made that term up, moralistic intra-group competition. We'll see if that picks up like a storm and people start
that's
using it
right.
everywhere.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, so what's this one? What's going on here?
So this is the church where they come to, and they realize this church is again, it's going to be very similar to kind of like the Parkside Community Fellowship as far as its architecture and so forth, and also kind of has a little bit of the quest in it as well. So they're doing things really well, definitely very friendly. But what is very interesting is this church is really defined by, how do we say this? The preacher is doing a bunch of self-help kind of guru
Hmm.
stuff, and so the people that are coming to this church are attempting to improve their life moralistically speaking. And so this would be the church where individuals who are the old TED Talks, right? People would watch the old TED Talks, the old going online and reading the improvement books to becoming a better leader, a better mother, and so forth. So these are individuals who are trying to take control of their life and improve their life and their moralism and how they do. Now, again, is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with trying to be a good business leader in town? No. Is there anything wrong with trying to be a better father? No, not at all. Anything wrong with being a better mother, a better human being as far as trying to be efficient with your time, to contemplate life and all those things? Nothing wrong with that. But the main emphasis of the preaching of this church was improvement kind of sermon topics. In fact, as they left, they noticed a bunch of books, in the area of the church where you could buy these books, and the conversations that they entered, there was a real hearty debate, not necessarily about theology, but about improving one's life. And so the Campbells are there, and Ben Campbell. He's actually kind of offended because he gets approached and gets invited to go to a finance seminar, and he's actually a CPA accountant, and he's like, "No, our finances are good." And then the person doubles down. It's like, well, no, you should come and actually. So now all of a sudden, Ben is basically rejecting the unity and the purpose of the church, which is improvement in this seminar of finances, because he's got it mastered. And
Mm.
so now there's a little bit of conflict. They're trying to find a way to hook him in and get him in. And so again, it's a competitive kind of atmosphere where everyone is trying to improve their life, and they kind of feed off of each other and trying to help improve, and a little bit of competition, but not necessarily warfare against the members. And then again, the goal is to arrive at some utopic bliss of perfection and having everything great in the life.
I'm thinking about um I don't know if it's a new phenomenon, but it seems like I don't know if you've run into this, Matt, like there's confessional Presbyterian churches now. That's like would be the narrow kind of slice of it's like PCA churches or OPC churches that they're theological, they're Calvinist, but they've grabbed a hold of like some of the worship style of the evangelicals. So they have a praise band, but it's like an mostly unplugged praise band that's kind of resetting hymns. So they're like trying to grab a hold of that old orthodoxy, but they all have got, beards with the fade, which is great. If I could trying to talk Carrie into letting me grow one of those so I could look cool, but it's like and they meet at for their Bible studies at the brew house, and they are all reading like Stoic books and stuff like this, and they're really interested in it's in some ways it's like they're trying to recapture some of the old stuff, but it's packaged very new. I don't know if that's the same type of this church or if that's something a little bit different. But you know that phenomenon that I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I'm not extremely familiar with it, but I am aware of it. The ethos is going to be very very similar. And again, like you mentioned, the Stoics, right? Aurelius, right? And a bunch of these individuals who were pagans, but they had some really good things to offer as far as wisdom, per se, wisdom in this life. And so, again, this church is going to be driven kind of with that same ethos, right? That same kind of mentality of gathering to uh, learn wisdom, and how to maneuver this very complex and very, well, we'd say very much becoming pagan world, very, very chaotic, unorganized, postmodern world that we find ourselves in. These individuals are bucking that trend of trying to rise to the top. And
Hmm.
so again, the Campbells, they appreciated this church as they came into it, a lot of good things. But again, Ben was a little bit turned off when he was challenged to come to a finance seminar, and he's like, "No, I got that mastered. Yeah, I'm an accountant." And then he realized that they didn't have the hook to get him, and there's they double down on pressure on him that everyone needs to be improving. And he's like, "My goodness, I just this is a little bit too intense for us and our family."
This is then they go to this is going to be my favorite one. They go to Peace Bible Church. What's that like?
Yeah, Peace Bible Church. They are now. I tried to make sure not to highlight a political party in this church, But they came to the church, and right away they found themselves interacting with this guy leading the church service, and they're like, "Is this a pastor? Is this not a pastor?" And they come to find out afterwards where the guy that was helping lead the beginning part of the service. Now, obviously, the pastor came and preached the sermon and all that, but he was actually a local politician. And Midway is actually just down the road from the capital of the state. And so they are very much associated, this church, with common political association. And their goal of that church is absolutely in the preaching, it's in its endeavors. It is basically becoming a political action group where their goal is to bring political policy to affect the state. Now, like Mercy Hill, what was happening with Mercy Hill is that the family was failing, and then the church stepped into the sphere of the family to fill that void. Now, we can actually commend that as being, admirable. However, here with this church, they looked at the state as failing, and so then Peace Bible Church was then entering into the sphere of the state, overstepping in that realm. Now, we got to be very careful on this. That is it wrong for Christians to be involved politically speaking? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We should be out voting. We should be informed as Christians. We should be serving on jury duty and following the speed limit, and then going to city councils. I mean, I'll share a quick story here. We had our Minot City Council here a while back. They formed a task force, and it was like a diversity kind of task force, and it kind of stirred the community up. And I read the fine print. I'm like, this is entering into the realm of philosophy and theology. And so I prepared a speech, and I went down, and it was a packed house. I mean, it was over 200 people. And I got up in front of the city council. I introduced myself, and I spanked them as a parent. I absolutely went right at them. And my closing line was, "City council, stay in your lane." But before I spanked them, I just said, "Thank you for taking care of our roads. Thank you for taking care of our sewer system, trimming our trees, arresting bad guys." I praised them. And then I went through, talked about this committee, and I told them, I said, "Stay in your lane." And I sat down, and everybody erupted with clapping. And I was like, "Oh my goodness." Then I was on the nightly news. They quoted me on the nightly news and the paper and all that. And
That's pretty cool.
but it was kind of cool. But the fact of the matter was what? They were what? Coming into the lane of the church. Now, likewise, the same thing for the church is we can actually go into that realm as the church per se. Now, again, we as Christians, right, as individual citizens, we will function in the church and the state and the family. But the church itself is primarily about the word and sacrament. Now, does that mean that the church doesn't criticize the state? No, we should criticize the state when it's acting badly. But again, the church should not be a political action group. The church is the church, and the state is the state. And so for this one here, Peace Bible Church, what ends up happening is they're advancing political policy through the church rather than advancing word and sacrament.
Yeah. That's do they have a rainbow flag out front or don't tread on me
Right.
flag out front?
Well, they should have a don't try on me, right? Um,
This is I just because we could do this both directions, I think. But man, I see it. I mean, maybe it's because I'm in Austin and you drive and we have people coming like from the ELCA, which is amazing and they come over and they say everything is politics. Everything is politics at the church, which is so there's so many ironies to that because I think I think that the progressive churches think that exact thing about like a conservative church like ours, that we're like over here, like that I've got like a MAGA stole or something like this that I wear in the service, and that everything we do is about politics. Whereas, that's everything we're trying to do is about Christ and his word and his wisdom and comfort for us. But they are obsessed with politics, but they can't see it in themselves. It's
right.
a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, yeah, and back to this Peace Bible, they are actually trying to invite the Campbells. This politician corners them afterwards, introduces himself, and finds out that they're in the same district where he's at, and he says, "I appreciate your vote. In fact, we're having apple pie here to discuss these policies here at the church and the fellowship hall. We invite you to come back." And so, definitely, the church has been, to a lot of degrees, I hate to say it this way, but hijacked by a political party for political advancement. And that is one of the difficulties with churches like Peace Bible. They need to stand above the fray. They need to stand above the political policies and speak into it. And so I think very frankly, we as pastors, Anytime we're in the pulpit, if we have an opportunity to condemn sin, not only in the church, but in the family, but we should also condemn sin in the political party and let the chips fall where they may. And so if we throw one political party on the bus, God be praised. If we throw both, God be praised. Because the word of God is not captive to a political party. The word of God is above it.
There's all these lines in Luther's Large Catechism. He talks about how we need to train the kids so that they will be useful to us and the church and to the family, the church and the state. And I was thinking about that this should be one of our um, objectives as a church, that we are inculcating the wisdom of the Ten Commandments to such a profound degree that our members can helpfully enter into the political conversation.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the training of the Ten Commandments is so that people can bring wisdom to bear in the life of the state as well as the home and the church, and so that we should be in some ways preparing our members for political involvement by inculcating the Ten Commandments. How about that for just a goal for the church? I think it'd be great.
Oh yeah, that's great. And again, we can go the opposite realm, saying that we have no involvement in the state, and that's obviously not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about, again, and as you go through this chapter, the footnotes that I have in there is talking about how we do influence politics. In fact, I would go so far to say that when it comes, and man, I'm trying to remember which pastor said this to me a while back, but his whole point was that historically speaking, like was it in Egypt in 300 AD, that 80% of the social humanitarian work was done by 20% of the population. That 20% was Christians.
Mm,
And so I would actually advocate that when you have Christians who are catechized and who understand, morality according to God's holy word of Ten Commandments, and understand righteousness and sin, understand all those things, then in our vocations as we enter into the family and the state, then we have a profound voice to speak clarity and truth, and then to enter into political office, whether it's a judge or a police officer, um, so forth, and then to execute righteousness in those estates, and in those vocations as Christians. And so I think, unfortunately, in my opinion, just going to the top, affecting policy without educating the laity, it's just a band-aid, in my humble opinion. Now, I'm not saying we don't try to, affect policy for the sake of curbing unrighteousness. That's good, but you need to do that. But I would say what's even more important is to catechize, again, our youth to have godly young men and women who enter into that sphere.
it's great. The seventh church is my church. This is my favorite. This is the one that I think should be the true church, the Trinity Church, whose unity is denominational heritage and purpose is denominational allegiance. That's the church I'm trying to build here, Matt. What's wrong with that church? Tell me about that
Right.
visit.
Well, when the Campbells come to this, they notice a logo on the outside of on the sign of the church, and
Yeah.
then they're coming in. They notice another logo on the outside of the church door, and Ben's like, "Okay." He comes in, he notices the ushers have pins of the logo, and so then all of a sudden he's sitting in the church, and he looks up and he sees the cross, and it has a logo on the cross, and he turns to his wife. He's like, "7." She's like, "What?" He goes, "I've seen that logo 7 times." And he's counting throughout the church how many times he sees these logos. And then they have announcements and they're talking all about these things, about missionary so and so and professor so and so. And they have a Bible college in this town of Midway. And they're talking about all these people. And the Campbells are like, what what are we talking about? And there's this like inside baseball that's going on. And it's all about the denomination. And then they actually leave the church service and they're going down a hall and they see this big long hall with all sorts of faces, and these are the denominational presidents that have, come out of the church and are in the church, and they encounter a retired denominational president, and he knows another Campbell who was a president, and so they're like, oh, the Campbells, are you related to this Campbell who was the president of our? And they're like, no, and it's like, oh, okay. And so the whole ethos of the church is
I gotcha.
is the
Yeah.
heritage of the denomination, and then the goal is to be, to support the denomination, to uphold the denomination. And the Campbells don't have a denominational connection, and so they don't know how to enter into that. Frankly, I've experienced this once upon a time. I came into a church. This is a previous denomination, a previous church many years ago. And I came in and they said, Richard, and they're trying to find where to place me. And I finally got to the point in my previous denomination. I said, no, I'm just a theological mutt. I said, I don't know relation. My dad is, at the time my dad was Catholic and my mom, she grew up in a different Lutheran church. And I'm like, no, I'm just a denominational mutt. I have no place in this denomination, but I'm actually a pastor. And then it's just like, oh, okay. So, but this is the, again, denominations, are they important? Yes, they are. Again, 100% they are. We need to have structure for discipline of pastors, for helping organization of churches that are in a greater network of community. However, if our heritage is not going to be the Christian faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob grafted into that gospel, with Abraham being our father and Isaac and Jacob and so forth, versus the heritage of the church, then we have some issues of unity. And then if our purpose is to uphold the denominational allegiance, there are times where denominations are, well, they're misguided. They're not focused on the right end goal. And sometimes denominations, they have a denominational, how do I say it in the book? It's upholding, and I had a fancy term, I'll have to text that to you, a real fancy term on upholding denomination. Denominational protectionism, I think I
Oh,
used.
nice.
That sounds really impressive.
I'm
But
looking
it was
right here. I'm
a
looking for.
denominational protectionism where the denomination exists to protect itself, to uphold itself as an entity. And that is definitely a difficulty with many denominations, that when it comes down to the point of actually standing for the integrity of the gospel and integrity of truth versus upholding an institution, oftentimes the institution protects itself rather than doing what is right. And that we see that with every organization in the world. There's a tendency to do that. So that's the problem with Trinity Church.
That's yeah, got it. And then so finally at last we get to Emanuel, perfectly named, God with us, church. That's so what was that like? So now
Okay.
we've been to 8 churches. They've all had good things, but
Yep.
the missing thing about from all of them is the name of Jesus and the
Yeah.
kindness of God in Christ and the death and resurrection of Jesus and the gifts that he's instituted. So hopefully that's what comes to in Emmanuel. How's that visit
Yeah.
go?
So the Campbells, they meet this man. He's a veteran, Vietnam vet, and at the grocery store, and he invites him to come to the church. And so then, they're like, okay, well, I mean, we've had such bad luck trying to find a decent church, so they're like, let's give it a shot. And so he takes the back of his honey to-do list and he draws a map out how to get to the church in the country. And you got to go by this truck haven stop and turn by this thing, and you got to go so many miles. And the Campbells are like, isn't it like on like Google Maps? And he's like, what's that? So anyway, they say, okay, well, let's go. So they take off, they drive north out in the country, and they find the truck haven. They take a left-hand turn, go on the gravel road, and they come up to this church, and here's Emanuel Lutheran Church. They come up, and it's an old church. They come in, they meet the people of the church. There's nothing really that fancy about it. They drink the coffee. The coffee is absolutely bitter as get out. They sit in the pew. The hymnals are all tattered and torn. But what they notice is they're sitting with this couple. What they're noticing is just a profound piety that's not overbearing. It's a piety that's not flashy. In fact, when it comes to the organist, now this is a true story. I put this, I was kind of have fun putting these little nuances in the book. The organist, back this up, I had an organist once upon a time, many years ago, or 20 years ago, and she would play the organ, and she had to have her glasses on the end of her nose like this, and she would play the organ, and it would be like that song, "Holy, Holy, Holy," and I kid you not, it'd be like this, it'd be "Holy, Holy, Holy, Lord God Almighty," and there's all these pauses, and I remember first hearing, I'm like, what's going on? So she would look up like this, she'd read the music, and she'd look down at her fingers and she'd play, and then she'd pause and she'd look back up and she'd read the music. I mean, so it was these metrics of playing and pausing as she would look at the music. So I incorporated
That's
this in
so
the book,
good.
so even the organist is off tune, and the coffee's bitter, and then the pastor gets up and he reads his sermon. Nothing flashy, he just reads the sermon, and yet the Campbells are just blown away by what they're hearing and what they're reading, and they're hearing about sin. They're hearing about righteousness in Jesus. And then they go up with this family and they kneel with this family at the rail, and they see this man, this Vietnam vet, pounding his chest, saying, God be merciful to me, a sinner, as he's receiving the body and blood of Christ. And so the point being is this Emanuel Church does everything poorly in the eyes of the world. Everything that all these other churches had, Emanuel Church does not have it. And it's just a typical church in the country with 50 souls, and yet in the midst of those 50 souls, they hear about Christ and the forgiveness of sins. And I should add too, as they're coming to the church, it's surrounded by a graveyard. And so you have these tombstones, right, all around the graveyard. And so then it really strikes the Campbells. What's the unity of this church? The unity of this church is to receive Christ and his gifts. And what is the purpose? It's to have these members abide with Christ unto death. And that was so prevalent as they walked through death, right? The tombstones around the church. And I used to serve at church. My fieldwork church was like this. You had a bunch of tombstones around. You walked through those tombstones of all these graves into this big, beautiful white church with a steeple where you have hope in the midst of those sanctified graves. And so for the first time, the Campbells, they're hearing about death. They're hearing about the resurrection. They're hearing about Christ and the forgiveness of sins. They see a piety in the people that they don't really care about the bitter coffee. They don't care about the tattered hymnals. They don't care about the organist being out of tune. They just don't care because they're there for the unity of Christ and the forgiveness of sins, awaiting to the point of what? Passing away into Jesus, abiding with Christ, unto death and the resurrection.
I had an email. Well, it came probably, I got it like probably a year ago. I finally answered it yesterday. And it was a story from a person who had traveled to all these different countries and all these different churches and had wandered around all the kind of different confessions and had come at last to the Lutheran Church and found some comfort in our doctrine, but had this question: how do I know it's true? Because every church argues their doctrine from the Bible, and every church says that all the other churches are wrong from the Bible. And so how does a person sort it out? It seems almost overwhelming. You're so helpful in your book to just be sorting this out. I suggested, Matt, and I'd love to hear your thinking about this. I said, I think the question that cuts through it all, and this is maybe what is happening in the end of your book here, is what does Jesus want to give me? Right? And how do I know what he wants to give me? Well, I just look at what he says. And especially the last couple days of Jesus' life and the first couple days of his resurrected life, he's putting things in place for me, for us, in his New Testament, with his body and his blood and the forgiveness of sins, and with the promise of the preaching of the forgiveness of sins, and with the making of disciples through baptism and teaching. So I said, these are the things that Jesus wants me to have. And then we just have to say, well, what is the church giving? Is the church giving me what Jesus wants me to get, or is it giving something else? And this is the problem with the seven false churches, right? They're giving lots of things, but the thing that they're giving is not what Jesus wants to give. It's something different. And it might be nice and helpful, but it's not the purpose for which the Lord himself has instituted the church.
I don't know how to say it better, Brian. I mean, you're spot on. I think of not only what you mentioned there about the Gospels, about the focus of the Gospels, what's happening in each of the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Mark. How every time I read Mark, it's like a big funnel, right? You start with, and I told my son this the other day. Him and his buddy were going to get together and just, read the Bible together and eat food. I mean, that's what he does. He eats food and plays football. And he's like, "What should I do, Dad?" I said, "Well, read Mark." And then just read Mark as if you know nothing about Jesus and ask the question, who is this Jesus that Mark is what? Confessing. And you're going to find out, you look at, Jesus in Mark, you're like, man, he's casting out demons. Like, whoa, that's cool. He's walking on water. That's amazing. He's giving what? Sight to the blind, so forth, the lame that are walking. And then you funnel and you funnel and you funnel and you funnel all the way down to the crucifixion. And he's bloodied up on that cross. And the centurion says, "Behold, the Son of God," right? I mean, this is pointing to the Son of God. And then the tomb is what? Empty, right? And so the whole thing of Mark focuses, and it's like a big funnel and brings us down to that crucifixion and that resurrection. And then what does Paul do in First Corinthians and elsewhere? He says, I preach to you of first importance, Christ crucified and resurrected. And so you look at, First Corinthians, you look at Galatians, you look at all of these epistles, and all the chaotic mess of all these early churches that Paul is dealing with. And what is the central focus? He's always coming back to Christ. And so even the Old Testament, right? I mean, we look at the Old Testament as that thread of the gospel promise from Genesis chapter 3 and then Genesis 12 and then all the way through the book of Genesis. And we see that promise and that funnel leading to what? The birth, life, and death and resurrection of Christ. And so again, churches, when we miss that focus of Christ, and as you said so well, what Christ longs to give to us and do for us, and when we miss that, we're missing the main focus. And when we miss the main focus, unfortunately, that's where the culmination of this book is, that you're then not a real church. You're a false church. You may be a helpful institution, but without Jesus, it's a false church.
I'm looking at the I bet I can share my screen here. I'm looking at the large catechism where Luther's talking in the third article about the church. And he says this: everything therefore in the Christian church is ordered to the end that we shall daily obtain there nothing. And I remember one of my elders says, "That's about right." I said, "No, the sentence isn't finished yet. We daily obtain there nothing but the forgiveness of sin through the word and signs, to comfort and encourage our conscience as long as we live here." So that the church, the entire Christian church, is ordered by the Lord Jesus to this telos, right? That's
Yeah.
the unity and the telos of the church, is that we receive the forgiveness of sins through the word and signs to comfort and encourage our conscience as long as we live here. And it's so fantastic, so beautiful, so simple and so wonderful. And it cuts through all of the fancy and the loud and the noisy, and it brings us back to what Jesus has put in place. And Matt, I'm so glad you've written this book and given us that clarity. It's not out yet, right? It can people buy it now? They can't.
Yeah, it'll be out October 6th, 7th, and 8th, and that at the
Okay.
beginning of October. There is a landing page that Concordia published. It's CPH, so be Concordia published now, cph.org/real church. cph.org/real church. And if you click on that,
I'll put that in the description.
that's
So
great.
people
Yeah,
can go and check it out and get that. And
they
if
can
people
download a sample there, I guess. They can order it, read a little bit about it, and yeah.
and if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that? Are you still on social media hanging around?
I am I'm let's see, on Facebook. Was it facebook.com Pastor Matt Richard? I've been using Twitter more lately. I've watched Twitter. I don't always, I post stuff on there. Let me just see what do you call it here? Your profile? X.com, Reverend Matt Richard. So
Oh, nice.
REVMATTRICHARD.
So
So
people can get a hold of you there as well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, and Matt, it's great to see you again. And I'm proud of you. I don't know if I have the vocation of being proud of you, but I
Oh
am,
yeah.
as your friend. I'm proud. I know that these are tough endeavors. But I'm glad you've put your nose down to the keyboard and put this out for us, and done it with giving us such clarity on I know this book will be why Jesus has a church. I know this book will be a blessing to many. So thanks so much. And for all you watching YouTube theologians, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that it brought some clarity also and comfort for you. Take a look at this book when it comes out. It'll be great.